equity, under the Constitution, we are required to address areas and the groups. So far, we have not done that. We have only talked about areas. And the reason why that is in the Constitution is because the poorest people are usually near the richest. You see, people who live in the slums around Vega, around Karen, are among the poorest. On the issue of marginalization, we have not discussed about the groups. But I can tell you, Professor, that the worst marginalization occurred in 78. When people are taken to detention, then the colonial government ordered that demarcation. Those people became the poorest people this country has had. Nobody has mentioned all those people. And having grown and gone to school in primary school during the colonial system, I know some of them. They are the most bitter people I have met anywhere. And have the advantage to go about that country, that's the different countries. And that is one area where we have shied away. Let me stop there so that we can make contributions.
Thank you. Let's take two more.
Hello. My name is Karen. I work with can you hear me?
No. Is that microphone working?
Yeah, I was saying my name is Ongera. I work with an organization called Article 19 Eastern Africa. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question to Inudia is, during your research, are there outright acts of discrimination? Because I haven't heard that come out in any of the presentations. It's all about equity and equitability. But are there outright acts of discrimination in how funds are allocated? And I think the guy from CRA would also input a bit into that. Part B of this one question. Two very important things have happened in the past 1 year that I think can make very good contributions to this whole issue. The passage of the Access to Information Act, and also earlier on last year, there was, I think the Ministry of Devolution released a set of guidelines on public participation. So something else coming out very clearly in your discussion is there's lack of information on the issues that you guys are trying to comment on and just analyze. Within that law, there's the practice disclosure kind of obligation. Do you think that will help a lot? My answer would be yes, but I'd like to hear more from you. And also looking at equity, the discussion on equity from the perspective of the person at the ground, issues of participation. How do you think that would help, for example, in the creation of your policy going forward? How ready are you to have public participation in the creation of that policy?
My name is Joshua Ngwai. I work for the German Foundation for World Population. When I was looking at the presentation, more be more the current state. I was wondering, is it a deliberate effect that politics affects the allocation of resources, or it's a coincidence? And then number two, I was just wondering, is it possible to look at expenditure instead of allocation, like in the coming years?
So we'll have some responses and then take another round. But I didn't get the last point. The mic is not working very well.
Yes. The last point, I was wondering whether in future we can look at expenditure instead of allocation, because sometimes what is allocated and what is actually spent is very different.
Good. Yeah, thank you. All right, so I think there's some questions for all of you to address. Starting with the first question about how we address marginalization or marginalized communities and not just geographical areas. So should we go in? Yeah, I think we can start with Prof, since you are the one who wrote that language. So. Huh?
Sorry, which question?
Well, I think the first question around how we. Carrera said that the Constitution talks about marginalized areas and marginalized communities, and in the
Groups.
yeah groups, and in the
Article 201, B Roman 3.
thank you, sir, and in the we can bring it for you, and the question is that we have addressed issues around the areas. But we have we addressed issues around the groups? And I think it might be useful for you to also, I mean, that question can be answered by everyone, but it would be useful for you to give some perspective on the thinking around the two ideas and how it would be, what would be the policies that we would use to address one or the other. I don't know. So I understood the question to be that this discussion has mainly been about geospatial inequalities, regional inequalities. Right. So the question, I think, the simplest version of the question is, what are we doing to address the issues of marginalized groups, which may not be addressed by just looking at regional areas? And then what was originally envisioned about that, and then what are we doing about it?
Well, I'm not sure what we think about it, but
you can start with the other point.
I think obviously there are some communities who are spread over across the country and not just in one region. So that, and then there
It's
are,
not working still.
there's a whole, I was looking for that whole article which Yes, I see, okay.
Yeah,
Well, we were of course concerned with regions, counties and so on, but there are also people who are disadvantaged, for one reason or the other, who don't all are concentrating in one place. And if you look to Part 3 of the Bill of Rights, which is called a specific application of rights, it identifies a number of groups who would not necessarily be covered by the discussion about or the allocations on a regional basis, and these are children, persons with disabilities, youth, minorities and marginalized groups, older members of society, people like myself. And so for each of these, the liabilities they normally suffer are identified, and there's an obligation on the part of counties, governments, it applies across and it sets out how their weaknesses, their discrimination can be redressed. I don't think we gave too much attention to relationship between groups and regions or counties, but we were aware that certain groups are spread over the country and have traditionally been discriminated against, and that we shouldn't forget them. And also, if you look at the chapter on devolution, the very first article which starts the discussion on devolution, it's mentioned clearly that the communities living there discriminated should be integrated and should have representation in parliament and in other areas. So so I think that's the way we treated with that category of people, and how far that has succeeded, I don't really know. I haven't followed that, but we have, Katiba Institute. We have represented some people like that, some people who are, their livelihood is through migration and whether they're herders and so on. And our view is that they are very badly treated and they are kicked off their land and other people take them over. We have gone to court, we have won the cases, but the implementation is impossible. And the Attorney General, my former student, has been a disaster for this country. So I think unless we tighten up the system of enforcement, I don't know what more we can do. So it's Article 174, which it deals with groups in relation to within the counties. I'm afraid that's all I can say.
Thanks. I'll let others also jump in on this, then I may make a comment as well. Do you want to?
Yes, maybe just to add on to what Prof has talked about. He's mentioned groups.
Oh, yeah. Maybe you can take it.
Sorry for that. Prof has mentioned groups to include persons living with disability, women, youth, the elderly, and such like groups, including the marginalized groups and minorities. As a CRA, as a commission, we are dealing with just a small segment of the groups that we mentioned, the marginalized. Now, these are the groups, including the elderly, the youth, and the women. In the past, there have been a lot of government initiatives, interventions that try to assist these groups. If you remember, there are a lot of funds that have been set up for the youth, the WAZO and the rest, Women Enterprise Fund. The elderly, I understand they get some transfers now. Children, remember bursaries are there. And so there are interventions that the national government, including county governments, most county governments have bursary schemes for children. And so the government, apart from the policy that we're coming up with, they have also come up with a lot of interventions to also assist groups that we call marginalized groups in the society. I don't know if that partly...
There are very many slum dwellers here who are so poor, and they have never been addressed.
Yeah, we are moving progressively. We are moving progressively.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's maybe. Well, John, do you want to speak to? You don't want to speak to that issue. So there were other questions which there were some other questions that were also raised. We should also address. I think John, some of the other questions that were raised, both access to information and participation, and the data that we have.
So maybe I can start with Njero's question on, well, really, I think a comment around where to get the information about this project. I think, so we've asked this question to Treasury many times, and Njero is one of the most common face in our forums. And whenever we ask Treasury about so why did we allocate resources to project A and not project B? How did we arrive at investing resources in one area and not the other? The answer that is always given is almost what you said. So it will be Vision 2030, and then we have the plans. But I believe last year someone got more specific and said, if actually you look at the sector reports, every development, every capital project that you're able to see in the budget, actually you should be able to relate it back to the sector reports, because those reports are also prepared with the non-state input into them. So we did that this time, and my colleague Mokera is also here. We've dug into those sector reports for the last 1 year. And the answer still remains that we do not know why the government, based on the information in those documents, why, for example, they decide to invest in a project in Itare, as we are seeing, and not the other project. Number two, the information that you have in those documents sometimes are speaking about 2017, 2018, but the information in there is about very outdated, ambiguous projects. So the kind of language that we saw in the category that I was calling national, where you have this broad language in terms of describing very huge investments, then is the same language you find in the sector report. So it's not to say that there is no information. I think there is information that is scattered in different documents. But that information is only useful for this kind of discussion when it gets to the specificity of, we have a project that is being implemented in Kibra. And the reason why we decided to implement that project and not the next project still in Kibra or in the next slum is because of reason X, Y, Z. So that's the kind of information we are trying to get at. And the reason why the sector reports sounded like a good place is because they are very detailed. Those documents are humongous. So you will imagine that something that Vision 2030 cannot get into the very granular information, that those sector reports will do that. So the improvement in terms of the information that I was speaking to is actually trying to address some of those gaps that exist in the documents that we have. So there is some improvement in some way. So the kind of information that we got in the budgets is not in the sector reports. So if you go to the budget and you go under roads, there are tons and tons of pages with the individual name of each of the projects, which you don't get in the sector report. But at the same time, there is still an opportunity between those budget documents, not just the budget estimates themselves, to be able to explain better that we are making this decision because either it came from the public or because it's connected to Vision 2030 as one of the infrastructure projects. I think that is very useful in terms of driving the discussion where people can understand why we are making certain decisions with them and about them. I think the next thing that I think Churchill spoke to, the issue of the access to information and the issue of the public participation guidelines. I think these are nice things, and I hate going the cliche of Kenya develop good things but we don't implement them. I really don't want to go that route, but these are some of the things that are falling in that category. So we have a very nice, well-thought Access to Information Act that was passed last year after staying in Parliament for almost 10 years, or for more than 10 years. But how many people are actually using it to try and access information that is in government? If I ask right here, how many of us have seen that act? Just by a raise of your hands. How many have seen the Access to Information Act? Okay, so about what? Almost half of the room. How many of us have actually tried to use that act and the guidelines given in it to access information from a government entity?
Katiba Institute has got 3 cases,
Three
and one
in
each
court.
time, still waiting for the information.
Yeah. So Prof is basically catering for many of us, and Mokera has also tried it. So we've not really gotten to a point where we are using them, but I still see the opportunity because ideally it should not be a case that we have to use such things to be able to access information. As Jason was saying earlier, it's supposed to be the good thing to do. So in cases where that's not happening, then we are supposed to use the acts. When we use the process as Mokera has done and it's not working, then you go the route that Katiba has gone, where you actually even go the litigation way. So there's still a challenge in terms of how are we applying some of these new things that we've passed in the past few years that would actually make some of these gaps that we are discussing today non-existent. Then lastly, I think the issue of the allocations that we were seeing based on being from counties that are politically correct, or is it directly a show of discrimination? Now, that is the discussion that actually the data is supposed to bring up. Is that what exactly are we seeing from this? Because from our own analysis, and we try as much as possible to speak from things that we can see from information we have, is we try to understand, is it because of population? Because most of those counties that you see with very high allocations, some of them are from the very highly populated areas. So could it be, and there are many people who believe in this theory, that you develop people, you don't develop places. So even if Marsabit is very big and without a road, and there is Kajiado next door with very many people, then you need to build a road in Kajiado because many people will access it. You've had those arguments. Njeru is laughing because probably he knows some of the culprits in that group. So we tried to understand it from that side, but we couldn't really get to an answer. And at the same time, some of the areas that have the highest allocations, for example, if you look at roads, it's Mombasa. So Mombasa might not come out as the most politically correct, as we like calling it, place. But at the same time, I think it's trying to understand the nuance. And that's why I was speaking of if we had information in these documents telling us that Nairobi is receiving the highest allocation because this is the place where you have the highest population in the country, or this is where you have a lot of what we need to make look colorful to attract investors, then we will be having a discussion about proposals that have been put on the table. Right now, we are basically throwing darts in the air because we do not know why that happened. And it can be interpreted in very many ways, and discrimination is one, political correctness could be another one. It's just that wide. But the fact that I'm sitting here today telling you I don't know is because there is no information I have looked at in the last 1 year that gave me any direction as to why exactly did we invest in activity A and not activity B.
So I want to take another round of questions. There was one here.
Thank you very much. My name is Gashehe. I'm a community organizer with the Madara Social Justice Center. It was very inspiring to hear Prof. my comments about historical perspective on equity and how the neo-colonial state has continued to marginalize people. But my question is to you, Jason. Is there research that has been done on question of debt? Like this regime came from 2013 to now. Is there research that has been done to show what is the implication of the debt? Maybe like how many people or million people the regime has taken back poverty that people cannot access or accessing health care before, shelter, education, but now they cannot access. As you pointed that collection of the data is very important. And maybe the question of debt, how that has impacted to the distribution of resources, maybe to the county and to different areas. Has that been done?
Okay, thanks. There was one there, the blue, and then come this lady here, blue also.
Thank you very much for the Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Brian. I work with the Institute for Social Accountability.
Just speak up.
My name is Brian. I stand up.
Yes.
My name is Brian. I work with the Institute for Social Accountability. My question goes to Otiwa. One of the criticisms of the national policy is that the services they offer, the areas they use, like the water and the road and health, are devolved, and still national government is supposed to cater for the services. Why is it so? Is there not a conflict in that sense? I hope I'm clear now. The other question was maybe to John Kinodia. He says, okay, suppose these recommendations are not taken in by the government. Is there a way in which they can be enforced to take up the recommendations? Thanks.
longer feel marginalized. And the fact that I'm the first woman to speak, I really wanted to inquire where the women sit is in that panel. But just to point on the discussion is, I know all counties have the County Integrated Development Plan, and that's the guiding force of how budget is allocated. So the question is, do counties have the capacity to spend all the money that they are given? Because if they don't allocate enough, or rather if they don't advocate for more money from national government, more often than not, it's not cascaded in the first place, or rather dispersed, for lack of a better word. And then I was wondering, the Equalization Fund Advisory Board, do they take into account public participation? Because if you're discussing about areas that are, if you're going to invest in an area that is not developed, does it have people, or is it the development is just done in that area because that area is not is marginalized? And then last but not least, are there any studies to show that there's a gross county income or gross county, like something that would cumulatively add to the gross national income or the gross development product? Thank you. My name is Imali, and I am from the German Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to take one out?
I think we respond to those and then take another round. We have time. Just to comment on Imali's first point, there was supposed to be a woman sitting in this chair. So the Commission on Revenue Allocation, in their wisdom, decided not to send a woman, to send a man. So please take it up with them. We had met the 2/3 rule for at least the 3 panelists. But I think there are a couple questions for probably for Joe, for John, and then I guess the first question was to me. Just on the issue of debt, it's an important question, and I think we are. I know John is starting to undertake some work. We are starting to undertake some work on debt. I think of course there's a question about intergenerational equity when you take on debt. We are borrowing now. Who's going to repay that debt, and who's going to benefit from the projects? So I can't say that there's clear research that has been done, but there's some research underway. Although it is important to note that much of this infrastructure investment, which John talked about today, is funded by debt. So when we are talking about these projects, not all of them, and some of the ones which we don't actually have the distributional information for, but a large share of the infrastructure budget in Kenya is still funded by borrowing. So what we are seeing here is how the money that we are borrowing then is being distributed to some extent. So it does touch on that. And I'm not sure about the issue of declining access to services. I think one of the challenges that we have with increasing access to services, declining access to services, whatever we are talking about, is the very slow pace of data production. So it was mentioned by Job that they are using the 2009 census plus the household budget survey. Now the household budget survey is fairly recent, but it isn't published yet. So CRA has some privileged access to that survey, but it has not yet been published. The last household budget survey was done in 2006. So we have been waiting we are getting to the 12th year since the last survey was done, and we don't have the data yet. Every time it is about to be released, there's some kind of election or some related political event. So we are therefore using outdated information, and it is very difficult then to track change over time, which is of course what we are interested in. And that's where the work that Mokera did and presented yesterday, trying to look at how access to human resources in health is changing over time, since 2013 up to today is very important, but it's not based on a comprehensive survey then, it's based on picking pieces of data from different places. So we have to resolve that issue. And I think I also just wanted to speak to the access to information. Of course, I hope John will be putting in the access to information request on the low volume seal roads to know where they are being spent. But I do want to point out that even with a functional access to information, which we don't have, Professor Guy has mentioned that they have not been, even after going to court, they have not gotten the data. After going to court and winning, they have not gotten the data. The point I was making at the beginning still holds, which is that if you request data from a county using access to information, as Mokera, you will still have to go county by county to request this information unless we have a national repository of county data. And that is a very tedious process for anyone who wants to actually do analysis. So I'll stop there and let the others jump in.
On the first question about why national government would involve itself in devolved functions through the equalization fund. This is created in the Constitution, and maybe, Prof, you can tell us the wisdom behind this, why we had to create a fund that provides services for services that should be provided by county governments, and is expressed that it's national government to do it. What was the wisdom behind that? Article 204. Article 204. But as he looks for it, I think the reason behind it is that in as much as we had a lot of hopes in devolution, that it would take service delivery next to the people, it was considered that there are pockets of marginalization, pockets of areas that are really not at par with the rest of the areas, and so that needed some kind of an action, something that could assist them rise so fast with some special attention through this fund, so that they catch up even as county governments try to provide services for the rest of the areas. They needed some interventions that will assist them come up and be at par with the rest of the areas. Prof, you found it?
Yes, you mean this one is?
Yes, the national government shall use the equalization fund. Why did they have to establish the fund, and yet these services are devolved functions?
Well, I think I cannot remember. You have to ask David and Day, who we consulted on this, that certain kinds of services may not get enough attention otherwise, and this would be compelling them. And also the equalization fund, as you know, as you talked about, is also a source of funding for the most undeveloped counties. So the idea was to create a fund, the allocation of which, or the purpose of which, will be restricted to the ones I've set out here. But it's not a good thing. I'm not an economist, so I don't know whether this was a good or bad idea, but we got legal advice from an economist on this.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make a point, which is that I don't think we should confuse the existence of the fund or the constitutional requirement for a fund with the necessity of Treasury to set up a advisory board. That is not in the Constitution. The decision to set up an advisory board is a reflection of the fact that the Constitution says that the equalization fund can be used as a conditional grant, or it can be exercised directly by the national government. And the decision that was made was to exercise directly by the national government. And then it followed from that an advisory board was set up. Had the decision been made to give it as a conditional grant, which is what some of us have said should have been done, there will be no necessity for an advisory board. So we should not confuse the two things. The fund, which is the financial regulatory framework for how it is governed, from how it is actually administered or spent. So just to clarify that. But let, did you have another?
There was a question on public participation. Is the board adequately involving the public in the decisions that they make? I say yes, because in my presentation, I said that during the selection of projects, the board went out to the 14 marginalized counties and with the assistance of the citizens in the areas that are marginalized, they selected the projects. And so these are projects that were agreed upon between the board and the citizens in the areas. And so I say yes, there's a lot of public participation in the management of the fund.
So let me speak to a few things starting at the tail end of it from Imali's questions. Now, one of the things that we've pushed counties a lot on is that they need to get a bit more creative and efficient in terms of their local revenues that they have to collect. So minus what they get from the national transfers is that they need to work harder to collect more domestically. And one thing that will really help is knowing what the county GDPs will be. So GDPs, GNIs are something that will be very helpful as counties are trying to get a bit more predictive of how much they can collect over time and what is actually the ceiling in terms of the maximum that you can really hit. Now, the challenge is that this is not something that we have. County GDPs is a discussion that I've had in quite a number of forums. There have been some efforts from the World Bank. So the World Bank released something a few years ago on county GDPs where they basically used this satellite imaging thing where you look at the spread of lights across the country and then you kind of try and predict the economic activity in a place based on how much electricity connection you're able to see from space. Now, with rural electrification, I don't know how accurate that is because everyone gets electricity even if they live in a thatched house. So there have been some efforts, but I think it's necessary if we are going to keep pinning counties down on their revenues, that they will only be able to predict well if that information is, and that falls directly under where KNBS sits. On the CIDPs, I think you had a couple of points there that I think are not really, probably might not be very related, but two broad points. Number one is that CIDPs should form the general development direction that a county wants to go towards. Now, the very first ones, we didn't do that well. I think for many of us who are engaging with counties, we bumped into Nairobi parachute consultants all over the place developing CIDPs. Some of them were kicked out by county assembly, so we didn't do that well that first time. And that implied that some of the CIDPs that we saw had very huge projects that would take an amount of money to implement that counties cannot even get within the 5 years. So some of the how realistic those CIDPs were is also something that probably we can correct as we prepare the current ones, which then comes to the point of absorption. And I think this is something that has very many facets to it. So why a county is not able to absorb all the money that they get from their local resources and what they get as national transfers. And there have been many arguments on this. So the governors and the Council of Governors have always raised the issue that the disbursements sometimes are late. And so that means that all these projects that they are trying to do, all these programs that they are trying to implement, then they are not able to do them on time. There have been arguments about just the human capacity in the counties. Do they have engineers to do all the necessary paperwork and surveys that you need to do before you build a road and so on and so forth? So there are many angles to the absorption discussion, but the good part, which I think has been sometimes misrepresented in the public, is that even if the year comes to an end and you've not absorbed your money, that money remains with the county. So it just goes to the county revenue fund. So there is a discussion about the efficiency of the uptake of monies in the counties, but there are very many sides to that discussion that we need to correct all round. I think there was a question about what recommendations that then can come out from this presentation that I made today, and how can we get that discussion to the people who make the decision. That, I hope I got that right, Brian. Now, the thing is, the point we are trying to make with this is that when you're having discussion about equity and you're trying to think of how to reduce inequalities that exist in the country, is that many a times that discussion has been framed as a discussion that should happen in very high level discussions that the David Ndis of this world and the Njerus of this world should sit in. And one of the things that we are trying to say is that that discussion can actually happen at the sub-location level where CRA is taking the marginalization policy discussion, because all you need to tell people is we are making this decision today and we are thinking of, you know, doing X and not Y this time because of 1, 2, 3 reasons. Then let people debate that. So it's basically pushing the budget from one of these discussions where decisions are just made for you to more of let's deliberate and agree on what to do now and what to do in the future. So the recommendation that we actually, the main thing that we're actually pushing into this discussion is that this discussion is actually possible even below the level where it seems to be seated. And so that is part of the work that we are doing at IBP right now, is pushing that for all the discussions that we have broadly around the budget, even when it goes to specific funds such as the Equalization Fund, is that it's possible to have that discussion with the very educated and even with the, you know, the uneducated farmer who might be somewhere in a village in Tana River. So that's kind of what I would say is the broad angle to this.
Okay, we'll take one more round of questions. There are some in the back there who have been marginalized.
Okay. My name is Kennedy Kindi. I'm from the Mashinani People's Assembly. My very question, because we are privileged today to have the research team there, the Katiba, the Constitution, and the CRA. When you look at the Constitution, chapter 4, part 2, of which is Article 27, clause 6, it says that to give full effect to the realization of the rights guaranteed under this act, the state shall take legislative and other measures, including affirmative action programs and policies designed to redress any disadvantage suffered by individuals or groups because of past discrimination. I just want to talk about water. The strategy must talk of Nairobi getting so much attention on water. But we people in Malari, we don't have access to clean water. So I think we belong, but we are not Nairobi. That is the simple question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to, yes, there's a lady there.
Thank you. My name is Ojambo Tusi from ActionAid. My question goes to Mr. Otiwa. You talked about from the consultations you've had, some of the issues, or one of the issues that has been proposed is that the equalization fund should be made conditional to the counties. And my question is, what are these conditions that the people are proposing, considering that the policy that you're in the course of formulating now is supposed to last for 5 years? And if I look at the one that that has been applied for the last 3 years, it picked out only 14 counties. And yet, in reality, the counties that are marginalized, especially in terms of access to water, they do not appear in those. Now, come this next phase, which will be for the 5 years, one, there is the proposition that you're saying coming from the stakeholders that it should be, the fund should be made conditional. I wonder what condition would be, which goes back to what my friend here was saying in terms of, rather than looking at only allocations, also look at expenditure, whether indeed the allocations for these specific infrastructure projects are what is spent on the same or not. And two, if at all we are talking of having just a section, so what happens to the other areas which are marginalized for the next 5 years? Don't they have a right to access water which is enshrined in the Constitution? So how do we go about balancing this?
equalization fund getting to now the 14 counties being given the money. So how is CRA working around to ensure that now those counties are addressing inequalities within the counties? Not just for the 14, but all the 47.
Okay, last comment here from Karen, and we'll have responses.
Thanks. My name is Karen. I work with Development Initiatives. And yes, CRA, my question is to you again. First, I apologize. First, I came in late, so I missed your presentation. But I know you have access to data, the 2015 KIHPS. But I wonder, what are you doing in ensuring that data is recent, up to date, complete, and accessible to all? Since it's accessible to you, what are you doing about the rest of us who are out here in the dark? And my second question, if I got you correctly, you mentioned that your focus marginalized sector groups are the elderly, the youth, and the women. So I'd like to know, what about the people with disabilities? Is that not a priority? Is it an issue with the data? And I think also, what you mentioned in terms of within the county, there are people who are marginalized within. So in terms of geographical distribution, why don't we also focus on those areas where there's people, poor people in as much as each county?
Sorry, the last statement again? The last statement?
Why don't we focus on poor people in a rich county? Okay, so I think almost all those questions are really for you, but I'll allow each presenter to say something as we close. Yes, oh, that's true. Yes, but you all have a chance to speak. But quite a number of the questions related to within county inequalities, starting from the first question about Mathare, down to this last question, cutting through several of the questions, is how do we address within county inequalities? And so I want to give each of the presenters a chance to say something to that and answer any final other questions.
Can you allow me to stand now?
Yes.
Thank you. The first question that I would like to respond to is about the conditional grant. Currently, in the resource distribution framework between counties and national government, there are what we call conditional grants. Conditional grants are funds that are given to county governments to perform specific duties. These duties are national policy actions. Like if national government wants to achieve an action, like something that unifies the whole country, something that affects everyone, then they give conditional grants to counties because they are nearer to people to implement such projects. We understand? Like if they want to do immunization and they want to cover everyone, they'll give funds to counties to undertake that because they have the personnel and everything. But the condition is that you have to spend the money on that specific duty. Understood? So those are the conditions. Like for this one, the equalization fund, if you were to give it to counties, it will mean that we come up with a framework that tells counties that you have to spend this money on A, B, C, D. That's why we call it a conditional grant. That's simple. It's no magic. That's the condition, that you have to spend the money on this, and the money is coming from the national government. It's not your money. Money is only meant for this project, and we can't implement it because we are at the national level, and you have the personnel and the technical capacity to do the work. That's why we are giving you the money. but you have to spend it on this specific projects. That's understood. Those are what we call conditional grants. Then, on intra-county inequalities, we've come up with a policy. The policy has identified 14 counties. What about the rest of the counties that might be having intra-county marginalization? Like they say, Kiambu is doing so well. At the same time, you know that there's a pocket of marginalization in Kiambu, a place called Ndeya. Ndeya is so marginalized in a county that is doing so well. He also said that most of the slums are located in places that are just adjacent to the leafy suburbs. And so how do you tackle such areas? Now, CRA moving forward, after we do this policy, we'll come up with what we call a master plan. This master plan will go into every county. We'll come up with an index that identifies areas in all the counties, areas that we think are marginalized, based on the indicators that we'll have come up with, the ones that we're using for this policy. So that we share it with counties and tell them that this area, as much as it's not identified nationally as marginalized, it is marginalized if we compare it with the areas within your county. And so if the funds, or when you're coming up with your CIDP, remember to allocate funds for this area, like for water, electricity, and all these other elements of marginalization. So that's our next step, coming up with a master plan for each and every county to at least address intra-county marginalization. Then on accessibility to data is a KNBS issue. Even the data that we use as a commission, we officially get it from the KNBS. So for CRA, we don't generate any data. The data that we use is officially from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, plus some data that we get from counties. And so on accessibility, data that we've processed, you can get it from our website, but we're not the original source of the data. We get it from other sources. Then PWDs, I think we talked about this, that the Constitution allows us to, allows the government to come up with affirmative action, affirmative programs that address marginalization, if you want to call it, for groups like PWDs, youth, women, and the elderly. And I think the government has done so well in terms of coming up. Oh, it's not enough, but at least they've tried. They're at least trying to address some of the inequalities within groups in the society. Then poor people in rich counties, I think that's what I've talked about. Pockets of marginalization, and we are coming up with a master plan that identifies these marginalized areas in counties, so that later on we discuss with them and development partners on how to tackle marginalization within counties. Thank you very much.
So I want us to, we need to bring this session to a close. We are getting to 11. So I want to give Professor Guy and John just 2 minutes each to wrap us up.
Maybe I'll just hold it.
You can hold it this way. But hold it close to your mouth, otherwise.
Well, maybe it's better. I have to turn over the pages. I think if the people of Mathare are being deprived of water, there may be a remedy. If you look at Article 43, I hope you all have your copies with you. 43 talks of economic and social rights, and it guarantees guarantees the highest standard of health, accessible to adequate housing, freedom from hunger, clean and safe water, social security, and education. These are the social rights, economic rights that are guaranteed to every citizen. Every person has a right. And but there is a little bit of a problem, because when this was being drafted, some economists in the government said, well, this is impossible. How can we do all these things, highest standard of health, accessible housing, we don't have the resources. So in the end, we put in a kind of proviso or limitation, which is in Article 20, which says that in applying any right under Article 43, the one I read out, if the state claims, and the state would cover, in this case, both the national government and the county government, claims that it does not have the resources to implement the right, a court, tribunal, or other authority shall be guided by the following principles. It is a responsibility of the state to show that resources are not available. So they have to prove that. You don't have to prove they have it, they have to prove they don't have it. In allocating resources, the state shall give priority to ensuring the widest possible enjoyment of the right of fundamental freedoms under this Article 43, having regard to prevailing circumstances, including the vulnerability of particular groups or individuals, and the court, tribunal, or other authority may not interfere with the decision by a court organ concerning the allocation of available resources solely on the basis that it would have reached a different conclusion. Well, that's a bit technical. I don't think we need to worry about that. So if a person, I think, feels that they have been denied Article 43 rights, the ones I read out, they can go to court and then, of course, showing the absence of these rights, then the onus, the burden will be on the government to say they don't have the resources. Now, this is actually can be turned to our own advantage by, in this way, we can challenge some of the expenditure or items of expenditure, let's say by a county, like today's papers saying, I think Auditor General's report, that I don't know how many billions were spent by people going abroad, by commissioners, by members of the assembly, by bureaucrats, and they would then have to prove that these are commanded a high priority. What they achieved by this could call into question the entire the policies of expenditure. It's actually a good opportunity to do that, and so if the Mathare people would like a Tiba Institute to help them to take this to court, we will be happy to do that, because this, as far as I know, has never been challenged. And now with the assistance of our economist friends, we'll have some idea of where the money goes and how it's done. And just finally, I want to say also, in Article 174, which is broad objectives of devolution, there is a provision for minorities or deprived groups within the county as well. It's not only on the national question. So if you look at 174, subsection E, D, so it is recognized that even within the county, there will be some minorities which are disadvantaged. And similarly, if you turn to the section on the legislature and the executive, there is a requirement that a certain percentage of these local minorities must be accommodated within these offices. So I think we did try to deal with the question. With what success, I don't know. Dare not think of it.
Thanks, John, just a last comment.
So I think I'll speak to so first of all, I think there's a question I had missed earlier about the allocation versus expenditure, the expenditure question. Sorry, I had missed that. So the thing is that we have this nice information in 2016, 2017 about allocation, but when you look at the implementation reports that we have, unfortunately that level of information is not available. So it's not possible for us to tell For example, the big dam I was speaking to, whether actually the 12 billion allocated to it was actually spent in 2016, 2017. So there's still a data gap on that side in that we cannot relate the two documents. Now, on the issue of inequalities within counties, I think we have come to appreciate that there are inequalities that exist among counties, and that's why we have a CRA formula that is redistributive in nature as well. So where you have more poor people, there's more money coming to you. So we have agreed to that, and Turkana is getting its 11 billion shillings. The question is, what do we do with the 11 billion shillings when it gets to Turkana? If there is a ward in Turkana or there's a sublocation in Turkana that won't get the equalization fund money, then how do we address it with the 11 billion shillings that is coming in from Turkana? These things have to be seen to be playing in the same space. So even if there is a county, because there are counties that won't get probably any marginalization funding from the equalization fund, but counties have the opportunity to think, how creative can we be in terms of ensuring that we sort out the differences that exist among our wards? Now, to start with your capital city here, when you have your ward development fund, you get the 25 million shillings for each of the 85 wards. But then you have Mathare and you have Kileleshwa and my Nairobi South ward being measured on the same weight, and each of us being given 25 million shillings. Now, it will be very difficult, if that is the thinking we have, to deal with some of those pockets that remain that don't necessarily get funding from the equalization fund. And we've seen some counties try out experiments, which we can always debate about their successes. Elgeyo Marakwet has tried out something, a formula actually, to distribute resources among their wards. And if you look at the measurements in it, it's actually trying to identify where the needs are and how to address them. Makueni is also trying out something, and there are a number of counties that are trying out to be a bit more creative than just dividing things equally among wards when the wards are actually not equal. And also there are things like the National Social Safety Net that deals with some of the groups that Prof mentioned. So, you know, the elderly, orphans and vulnerable children and so on. So there are quite a number of things that are in the budget space that are actually dealing with the issue of marginalized group and inequalities that exist even below the county level. But as I said at the very beginning of my presentation, the fact that we have created all these little funds everywhere, it's also become very difficult to keep an eye on all of them. So you have CDF, you have that fund, you have Women Fund, Youth Fund. The last time I had, there were 46 of them. I have a feeling they've grown. So there are quite a number of things, but to know whether all of them are working towards one objective, then that's a discussion, especially for the students in this room. You are studying public policy, you're studying something that is related to how government makes decisions, then that's actually a very big research area in terms of how government makes its decision and the approaches that we take. And with devolution, you have 15, 20 years of topics for your masters and your PhDs. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists for their interventions, and thank all of you for attending. We are very happy to see a number of the seats filled this year. And just as you leave for tea, I just wanted to make one point, which is to something that Job said around the conditional grants and the issue of conditions. It is possible to have conditions which say that a county must spend money in particular areas without saying that it must spend on particular projects. That allows the county to decide which are the priority projects, but to ensure that they take place in the most marginalized areas. So there are many ways to design the conditions, but among the conditions would certainly be that you must address within county inequalities with this money that we are giving you. So that's the last thing I want to say. Again, thank you to everyone, and please join us outside for a cup of tea before you run back to your classes.
Check, check. Check, one. Check, check. Check. Check, huh?
it was considered very important that we should give everybody equal opportunities. And this is what the people told us. And women came everywhere we went, wanting equal rights. So the concept of equality is that everyone has the same opportunities, same rights, same responsibilities. And then equity sort of means that it can't be mechanical. So for example, if we were to say women had been discriminated against, now they have equal rights, they apply for a job, and the man, of course, has better experience because women didn't have a chance. So there we don't necessarily want equal, we want equity, fairness, so that women should be appointed even if she doesn't have the same qualification as the man, provided they can do the job. And this could be something you might do for 20 years, then women will catch up. And equity, of course, is more important because we have had we have many communities, different histories, oppression, and we thought just to say equal rights wouldn't be enough. We have to redress the harm done to them in the past. And so the two of them, of course, are consistent and they support each other. There's another concept called human dignity, and that also, in a way, connects to this. Because if people lose their self-dignity, if they feel they are thought to be inferior, not given equal opportunities, so these three things are actually connected. And so we were looking at how far it has worked out in different areas, in employment, in education rights, and sort of whole gamut of entitlements that normally people would have. So that was the primary thing. And when we were writing the Constitution, we began, as you know, about 15 years ago. These things were, women were clearly much worse off than they are today. So in women we have made some progress, but in other communities, the pastoral communities, the forest people, we have actually gone, it's been worse. So we were also discussing what kind of remedies people can get if the government ignores the Constitution. And another focus, of course, was devolution, where particular groups are put together and are one government. And what happens within the counties. So it's not only at the national level, but even at the county level, this principle of equity and equitable must be applied. And we had some time to discuss how far this has succeeded. And I think my own assessment was a bit negative, but it does seem that there's been some improvement. But I think we need a lot more and quickly, because we have among our communities people who are very much deprived, and I don't think you can have a sense of nationalism. There can't be a concept of a Kenyan if they are treated differently. We need national unity very much at this time in our history. And so I think fairness to everyone is not only for them, it's also for all of us. Will do? Okay.
You summarized this very well.
Okay, yeah.
Basically, let me just get that for you. It's basically what you're saying.
Mm.
Fairness for everyone is what we bring actually.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Good. Thank you, Professor. Okay.
when we're distributing resources, we must consciously think about our strategy. Remember, hapo tulikuwa tunashinda tunasema kila sekta inataka kufanya vitu nyingi, lakini pesa sio nyingi. Pesa haiwezi tosha tufanye kila kitu ya sekta, si ndio? Na pesa haiwezi tosha tufanye kila kitu ya energy, ya health, ya education. We have to make a decision. Hizo ndio vitu tunaita trade-offs. Sijui nani yako na card number 9. What does that say? Card
says our approach to development, trade-offs.
Okay, that's exactly what we want to learn now. How do we approach sector allocation of resources with regards to our development strategies? Okay, what do we focus? How can we think about it? Number one, tunaweza amua tuendeleze human capital or infrastructure, what we are calling capital. From page 19, we are talking about human versus physical capital, okay? And when we talk about physical capital, what are we talking about? Infrastructure, okay? Already you're starting to draw what sectors we're talking about. When you talk about human capital, which sector will that be? Human capital, which sector develops human beings? Education, what else? Health, you can say health is improving human capital, but mostly it's education, isn't it? And then when you talk about physical capital, what are you talking about? Infrastructure, okay? So here is the trade-off we have to make. This year and in the medium term, the following years, what do we want to develop more? How much more should we give to these sectors that develop the human? And how much more should we give to these sectors that develop infrastructure, bridges, roads, and such things? The other thing we want to talk about is supporting investment versus active industrial policy. The government has to make a decision. This year and the few years that are coming, how do we develop our country? Do we as the government take part in business? Or the government may take part in business itself. We want to create an environment where business can take place. Haya, nani yako na 9.3?
Debt versus services.
Debt versus services. For debt, I want everyone to understand, when donors are giving us money, they don't give us money for recurrent expenditure. Most of the time, our services are paid by our own taxes. So the government will collect money through taxes and use it for services. Kwa sababu services ni mtu anapatiana kama mwalimu, kama daktari, services, si ndio? Mara nyingi tukipata madeni ni ya infrastructure. For example, gani nye sahi inasikika sana ya deni? SGR. SGR tumepata deni kutoka wapi? China. Haya. Sasa tunaweza amua tunataka kufanya hizo vitu za infrastructure. Inamaanisha kuwa kwa sababu hatuna hizo pesa nyingi, tutachukua madeni. Si ndio? Kwa sababu tunaona tukikuwa na SGR labda tutasonga mbele zaidi. 9.4. When we talk about physical security, we are talking about actual physical security. Yaani wewe kama mtu ndio usiibiwe, ndio vitu zako zisichukuliwe. That is physical security. And who does that? The police or KDF, isn't it? So in the police we said wako wapi? Governance, justice, law and order. Then there is social security. Okay? That one is let's have people who are educated, people who can earn. Let's support them in business so that they have an income, okay? So they feel that they are socially secure, isn't it? Things like NSSF, things like NHIF, for example, that ensure that older people have some income, that ensures social security. Do we get the difference? Okay. Now this is how it applies to sectors. The government, with our help in public participation and public deliberation, has to decide, where do we put most of our money? Do we put most of our money to protect physical security, or is it to ensure social security? Think about it this way. If people are not poor, if people don't feel discriminated, then they're most likely not to be thieves, they're most likely not to be terrorists, they're most likely not to come and destroy your property, isn't it? When people have jobs, when people feel like they can economically support their lives, they will not have the thought of, let me join Al-Shabaab, okay? So if you ensure social security, someone can argue, then you might not need much for physical security, isn't it? Tukifanya vijana wetu wapate kazi, hawatapatikana na Al-Shabaab, iwachukue waende wafanye terrorism, si ndio? Hivyo basi tutani kwa KDF.
I need to make a number of groups. And this is what I am going to do. Number one, I want to have a group that will have women only. As I told you, one of the things that we are doing na hizi forums ni kutest. Ukibadilisha mambo fulani fulani ya vile tunafanya public participation, will the public participation be better? Sawa sawa. So one of the things that we want to test ni ukiweka group ya kina mama pamoja, discussion hapo itakuwa mzuri zaidi ama itakuwa mbaya zaidi, hiyo tutajua leo. Sawa sawa. So I first want to have a group that will have women only.
Tuanze na health, ni dhati. The health sector consists of the Ministry of Health and several semi-autonomous agencies. NHIF is under health sector. How does it work? Because I understand NHIF si huwa tunalipa.
NHIF covered, lately it was advanced. If you've been there, so it was lately advanced. In such a case that now it covers, even for surgeries, it does cover for surgeries, of which in the past it never used to cover. So it's of help.
My question is, why is it under the health sector and yet it is the individual? The objective provision of what is specialized services. Do we know this is specialized healthcare services? Tunataka kujua those hospitals that is taking almost 40% of the sector budget ni services gani wana offer, si ndio? Then what are the procedure tuseme a mother in Isiolo ni procedure gani ndio administration, planning and support services, si ndio? So to strengthen leadership, management and administration of the health sector. That sector ndio sasa imechukua 15 billion. Hiyo si mingi? So where is this 15 billion going? And are we feeling as Isiolo people, as a county? Dabo, andika. Page 36. The sector consists of 9 MDS. Below is that the MDS in the program and the program in each, together with recent allocation to MDS, the current financial year, that is, the sector is responsible for ensuring the country has efficient, affordable, and reliable infrastructure for sustainable economic growth. Tuko na general administration, planning and support services, ambaye ilipata 1 billion, rail transport ilipata 157 billion, marine transport ilipata 17 billion, air transport ilipata 7, and road ikapata 1. And that is 34% of the
Have you ever participated in a national government public participation forum on the budget before?
Yes, only once.
No? All right.
satisfied.
Okay, there's health, roads and infrastructure, tourism, education, foreign affairs and international trade, information and communication, security, water, agriculture and evolution.
One is roads and infrastructure, 2 is tourism, 3 is water, 4 is health, 5 is education, 6 is foreign affairs, 7 is security, 8 is youth and gender, 9 is information and communication, 10 is agriculture and fisheries. We need to increase the budget of security.
What did you increase it to?
From 10% to 20%.
To 20%. What did you give the rest?
The other one I give health 20%.
All right.
Because as we know, even health has been devolved.
Yeah.
But there are so many issues which are underlying.
Okay.
Foreign affairs, I give 5%.
Okay.
Tourism, I give it 5%. Gender, I give it 10%. Information and communication, I give it 5%. Water, I give it 10%. Roads and infrastructure, I give it 10%. Education, I give it 10%. Agriculture, I give it 5%.
All right. Okay, for health, I'll give it 15%. Roads 10, tourism 5, education 10, foreign affairs 10, information 5, agriculture 10. Okay, personally, I'll say that we really need information with us about the budget of the country, and if it's possible, there should be a public participation before the budget is passed on, since we don't know which approach or procedure they use so that they can set the budget. All we know is that they have a budget reading. We don't know which approach they really use.
I want to inline with the national government, like the policy documents and the budget. So that when the government allocates, even as we have an input of giving those views.
Ile forum ambayo tuko nayo leo is one of those forums that we are having around the country kuangalia je ni vipi tunaweza kuimprove public participation going forward. Kuangalia je kuna mambo fulani tukibadilisha kwa vile tunafanya public participation saa hizi itafanya public participation in future ikuwe nzuri zaidi. Vile nimesema ikuwe na umuhimu kwa wananchi na pia ikuwe na umuhimu kwa serikali. Kwa sababu wakati public participation ni vizuri na yale matakwa wananchi wako nayo inaonekana vizuri, then pia ni rahisi kwa serikali kujua ni nini wananchi wanataka. Na ni muhimu pia wakati serikali inatengeneza budget ijue yes sisi kama serikali tuko na agenda yetu, lakini pia wananchi kuna yale mambo ambayo wanataka. Kwa hivyo leo concentrate na ile mambo ambayo national government inafanya na ile public participation kubwa kwa national government inafanyika wakati gani. Kuna mtu yote hapa ashaikaa kwa public participation ya national budget? Mkono kama ushai participate ya national, ya county. Unaona, kwa hivyo lazima tuangalie pia national government nini inafanyika huko. Kwa hivyo ile information ambayo tuko nayo hapa ndio tutatumia leo kujifunza national government public